Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for this week's live stream and Q&A. Hopefully, you're all having a great Tuesday so far. We're going to set some time aside tonight to talk about the 2025 Star Wars books as this year continues to come to a close. We are going to be doing this as our final little bit of 2025 wrap up for Star Wars. And then starting next week, we're going to talk about 2026. So make sure you stay tuned for that, as there's a ton to talk about in 2026. So it might need a couple streams to get to everything. But we're also going to be taking your guys' live questions. So make sure you keep firing them into the chat. We have a lot in the chat right now tonight. So thank you for sending those in, Brandon and Critical Thinker. If you're watching right now and you haven't sent in a chat, make sure you do so. You get the ability to get onto the stream every single week. We take 2 questions per person, then cycle to the next person. And once we get to the bottom, then we'll go back up to the top and keep going with the remainder of the people who have asked more than 2 questions. Make sure you have liked the stream if you haven't already. It really does help us out. Subscribe for more content like this. Like I said, we'll continue with our coverage next week of our end of the year wrap up / next year preview. So we are going to be talking about 2026 Star Wars next week, probably the movies and TV side. And then the week after will be the books and comics side. So if you're interested in that coverage, make sure you subscribe and join us next week. Also, make sure you comment if you're watching on replay. It does help us out, and we will respond to your comments, even if you aren't joining us live. But if you enjoyed the stream, watching on replay, make sure you join us live next week. All right, let's get into our discussion tonight. And like we did last week, I think we're going to start it off with the first book of the year. So we have 8 Star Wars books to talk about this year, and that's not even including the kids' books. We're only going to be doing adult and young adult Star Wars books, but we have 8 to talk about and rank here tonight. So we're going to start with the first one, then we'll get into some questions, then we'll keep bouncing back and forth. But there is a lot more to talk about with books than there were TV shows. So let's start with the first one that came out this year. And it feels like a long time ago, but it was Reign of the Empire, The Mask of Fear, which came out back in February. This was a book written by Alexander Freed. It's the first book of a new trilogy called the Reign of the Empire trilogy. We are getting our second one next year, but it seems to be our fall release, as they haven't really detailed what it's about and when it's coming. But I really loved Mask of Fear. I thought this was a really strong book. One of Alexander Freed's best books. I would say his second best, in my opinion, behind Victory's Price. He did a great job crafting a political thriller, connecting a lot of the post-Revenge of the Sith politics to overall kind of the general darker style we have seen come out of an Andor-esque world. And I think he did a really good job building those characters and kind of creating that vibe, creating that tone that fit really well with the show, which was nice because it came out 3 months or so after the book came out. And then rounding those characters into a story that felt very believable with their Andor counterparts. So I thought he did a great job with that. The tone was great. Nice, fast-paced story with it being long. So I thought the tension, the pacing, all of that worked quite well. With a book that doesn't necessarily have super explosive moments, you're still compelled all the way. And that's what Alexander Freed does when he's at the top of the game. His political writing is really strong. One of the best political writers we've had in canon, and one of the best in a while for Star Wars. So I thought he did a great job with that. A lot of good teases. I can't wait to see where this series goes in the future. It was a great start for this trilogy. It was ultimately, when all was said and done, my second favorite book of the year. I thought this was a really strong start to the year and one of my favorite books throughout the entirety of 2025.
Yeah, it is a very strong book. I was very surprised just how easily I sunk into it. I think one of the biggest things for me that kind of like shocked me was like, oh, there's like a really, really strong emphasis on this being very much a days after Revenge of the Sith and dealing with every single party that's still in play here. It's like, yes, Anakin has been sent to Mustafar to kill all the separatist leaders that are gathered. That doesn't necessarily mean that just turning off the droids, killing all of them, like ends a whole movement, right? There's plans upon plans, even by those who, aren't directly manipulated by Palpatine as he orchestrates both sides of the war. So seeing the Confederacy and like our lead character, who is like a very interesting assassin like character, and seeing how he's like, flirting between what we have here in this very early days of the Republic, turned Empire, working with people like Bail Organa, Mod Mothma, who are, at this point already facing severe consequences, like the first real big blow and like putting them into their place at this point in time. And I just found it really surprising just how well in depth it went through the point of view of this character of what the Confederacy was like, why someone would be part of the Confederacy, what people are willing to sacrifice, and then the kind of like reconnection to ancestral roots and all that, and what the CIS also has erased from people who have, kind of been almost forcefully drafted into this movement here. So found that really surprising how well it was done. Again, like I said, the detail is so good here, but more than anything else, I was just surprised to see the Bail Organa Mon Mothma dynamic. So much of what we've had in live action and especially in animation and stuff kind of implied like, hey, these guys have always worked together, with their differences. This is a book that's really about like, no, there's very different approaches, and they're not exactly like friends of friends, right? They're like friends of Padme, and therefore they kind of friends, but it's like friends in a friend group, right? And I found it really interesting seeing how they would work together, separately, come apart, the way they use their skill sets, the way they use their ideologies to achieve their goals, and where they came up short at this point in time. Really, really surprised how much I enjoyed this book. I I wanna say this is maybe my number 2 for the year. I really did like how it was, but I might be convinced to be push it up to number 1. I think it's just been so long since we read it that I feel like I'm almost underselling it at this point.
Yeah, that's fair too. It is a very strong book, one of the best of the year. Let us know what you guys think in the chat or in the comments if you're watching on replay, what you thought of Reign of the Empire Mask of Fear. And let us know also in the chat what your favorite books of 2025 were. Let's do our second one because we have a lot to talk about, and then we'll take some questions here. So, the second book to come out this year was surprisingly The High Republic Into the Light, which doesn't feel quite as far away as Mask of Fear. But Into the Light was our final YA book in The High Republic. It was our latest book from Claudia Gray, who hadn't written Star Wars in quite some time, especially when it came to the YA side of Star Wars. And this one really is almost a spiritual sequel, even if not direct sequel to Into the Dark, which was Claudia's first High Republic book and the first YA book in the High Republic, all the way back in phase one in 2021. And I thought this was a pretty good book overall. Character wise, this is a book that really rests on the work they've done for characters like Reith and Comac and Aslan Rel, even somebody like Nan throughout the entirety of the initiative. Plot wise, I was underwhelmed. I thought something like Into the Dark was significantly better plot wise, significantly more interesting, significantly more important than something like Into the Dark. But I still found myself compelled by most of what happens in Into the Dark purely because I love the characters. And even though it doesn't have too many significant plot points for those characters like Reith and Aslan. They still continue into trials, and this is by no means anywhere close to the last things that they learn or the last things that happen to them. Even with that fact, I still found myself remembering a lot of the plot points and a lot of the beats of this story because of how much I cared about those characters. This was a fairly strong year for Star Wars books, not too many that were all-time greats. I think Mask of Fear and ultimately my number 1 will be the only ones that I think are in that upper echelon of Star Wars canon books. But this rests right in kind of that middle tier. I thought it was a pretty good Star Wars book, pretty good in terms of High Republic. Could have been a lot better, so a little disappointing in some ways. But overall, I'll rank Into the Light as my 5th favorite out of the 8 we got this year.
Yeah, Into the Light is this strange book where I actually really enjoyed everything about the journey, but it's not necessarily a story that's like, oh, yes, this is the final YA novel. And, just to get my biggest criticism out of the way, I would say that I just don't think Claudia Gray has really found herself fully at her best capacity when it's come to the High Republic. I feel like when she's given these one-off stories, when she's allowed to like entertain characters that are maybe a little bit more tied down to overall story of Star Wars who have been around in the history of Star Wars for longer, I think she can do a lot more with that. And especially when she's here to like define something pretty major about like a relationship or a big changing point for these characters. The High Republic is obviously a huge group effort. She was obviously part of the initial batch of the authors, but now that we've kind of had everything kind of like settle with the whole three phases, it really does feel like Fallen Star was her only like great book, and even then, we were a bit critical about it when it was coming out because it was like, "Oh, it just feels so kinda enclosed, kind of just, like, trapped within itself." It just doesn't really feel as expansive as the first 2, as Light of the Jedi and The Rising Storm were in terms of just the scope of the story, and obviously, a lot of that's intentional, but yeah, it just felt like now that we look back at it, Fallen Star clearly is a big tier above what else she's put out there, and that's still having been someone who enjoyed Into the Dark. But yeah, my feelings for Into the Light are pretty much where my feelings for Into the Dark kind of sit at this point. Pretty interesting side story, wrapping up a lot of stuff, but not necessarily anything that's like, yes, that's really worth it. And there were some story elements that I actually was pretty pleased by kind of appearing here, like all the stuff with the white worship trees, and it's just like the idea of like the Sith and it's like implanting in the story. Like these are elements that I think if had been more directly played with, like if this was the story where we actually got like a not like a Sith appearing, but like dealing with Sith history and stuff like that, and a little bit more about Kashyyyk's role and like maybe these ancient wars and stuff that could be like explored in older Republic. It could be explored in an older Tales of the Jedi myth or something. I think this would have been something super compelling, but because this is High Republic, it kinda gets narrowed and focused and crunched down again, so, unfortunate. I really liked everything what we got with Reeth. I really liked everything that we got with Aslan here. I think it was good lead up for that dynamic, especially to what we have in Trials of the Jedi, and I did like seeing other characters that we haven't seen since Into the Dark and all that show up and get some sort of conclusions, some reminders, like, "Hey, this isn't just, like, books this is not like a book-based initiative where, they show up once and that they're done. They can jump between mediums. They can come back much later. Like this is the Jedi during their prime, essentially. So it's nice that this book definitely played into that sort of scope and feeling, but still not super hot for me. So I would say this is like my number five.
Well, we're right on the same train of thought for both of the first two. Let's get to your guys' comments now for a little bit, and then we'll go back to the remainder of the last six that we have to rank for the stream. Again, if you're just joining us, make sure you hit the like button, really helps out our stream. And make sure you send in your chats. We are a first come, first serve stream, but we do take two per person, then cycle back around to the top again for people's set third and fourth and fifth and whatever questions. So don't worry if you haven't commented yet. You can send one in. If you'd like to support the channel and guarantee your chat on the stream, send in a super chat, really helps us out, and we will answer your question immediately. Also, make sure you check out our Patreon YouTube membership programs because they do have tiers that allow you to have priority chat access for the entirety of the time you are subscribed. So make sure you check those out. All right, up to the top now, we have Brandon Tran 5316 who says, non-Star Wars question, thoughts on the new rumor that Netflix and Warner Brothers will merge together, possibly making DC, Harry Potter, and Cartoon Network, and possibly, well, those would be included, yes, in the sale, and might rival Disney. Well, okay, so this has been the hot button topic in all of the film circles throughout the last week or so, and it's not a rumor, it's happening. The only real obstacle right now is that Paramount has come in with a final bid after they have already accepted the Netflix offer at Warner Brothers. So people are referring to it as a hostile takeover, but it will be ultimately up to the Warner Brothers shareholders to decide whether they want to backtrack on their Netflix deal and go with Paramount now, And if they do so, I believe they have to pay like $6 or $7 billion to Netflix to back out of the deal. So it's a costly one, but it will be up to them ultimately which one they choose. But yeah, if it goes through, that means every IP that Warner Brothers owns will now be a Netflix property, which does include DC. And it doesn't just include DC movies. Warner Brothers owns the entirety of DC Comics, just like Disney owns Marvel Comics. So Netflix will get the rights to DC Comics. They will get the rights to everything that is published through the comic book industry side of DC. They will get the rights to everything. And also, people don't realize this as well. Six Flags is owned by Warner Brothers, so that would put Netflix in the theme park game. That remains to be seen. There's been a lot of rumors that they would probably sell off Six Flags, and I know Universal was very interested in Warner Brothers in general. I think they would be probably the top buyers for Six Flags if they wanted to do so. Um, or they could kind of make it its own company, or somebody could come out of nowhere, with a bid. But it's a very interesting deal overall. When it comes to my thoughts in general on the whole thing, I mean, I think it sucks in general that Warner Brothers has to be sold. It sucks that we're losing another major studio. First, we lost Fox a while ago. Now, Warner Brothers, it just continues to shrink the market for filmmakers, continues to shrink the market for movie fans in general. We get far less interesting content when only a few voices control the entire space in the movie industry. And so that in general is just unfortunate no matter who buys it. With Netflix, they've been kind of wishy washy with what they've said about Warner Brothers, which is my only concern about this. I think Netflix provides a really interesting platform for these properties to become even bigger than they've ever been. Like if you're a DC fan, the likelihood that a Netflix supported streaming service can skyrocket the popularity of these characters, and then maybe also get even more properties and more small tier DC things made, really increases the chance of us seeing certain IPs like that, or the amount of money that could be poured into a Lord of the Rings. Like, people haven't been happy with Amazon's Lord of the Rings show. Imagine a Netflix led Lord of the Rings show. They would at least have the budgets. Netflix hasn't, to me, had the greatest track record ever of making TV and film. They've had a much better track record on TV. Film wise, they have had quite a few Oscar nominees, but they've also had quite a few red notices as well. So it's like, it's kind of a give or take. But my thing is that I'm just very passionate about the movie going experience. And I know they came out today and said, well, the reason we are going to buy Warner Brothers is because we want to get into theatrical exhibition. But then last week they had not said that. They said they were going to shrink the theatrical run for a Warner Brothers movie to about a month, which again is already kind of where theatrical is at if you don't make any money. But you never know how it's going to keep shrinking over time. So I'm very mixed overall on just this whole thing. I don't want Warner Brothers to get sold. I think it would be better if they didn't. But I think if you're gonna give, if it's gonna get sold, it's gonna happen. Netflix provides a lot of interesting opportunities, barring they don't get rid of theatrical releases. If they do get rid of theatrical releases, I I'm not for them getting Warner Brothers. But if they still hold to what they're saying right now, then it can be, a decent proposition for both companies. It just sucks that we have to lose one of the giants of the movie industry.
It's unfortunate that that's the world we live in. And I mean, if we even look at the current state of Warner Brothers, right? It was purchased and merged with Discovery, and why that even happened was just silly to me. Like, Discovery is about like animal watching channels and like just reality shows and all that. And that was already hailed as a horrible deal. And then now look, we're just like a year and a half, 2 years since that happened. Like, it's so hard to keep track of it now. And they've thrown in like a HBO Max to Max to back to HBO Max change in between too, for good measure. So yeah, I mean, Zaslav has really been the guy he's been like consolidating, selling, and the biggest problem is that so much of Warner Brothers is built off its debt right now. There isn't really, like, good cash flow, and all these mergers, theoretically, if, like, the service combined makes it better, right, like, should allow for this to be like, "Oh, yeah, like, now we can really start pumping out good stuff and really be on top of our stuff," but it's just a fact. Someone who is paying for Discovery at that price for their dedicated streaming service isn't necessarily willing to be like, "Oh, I'm certainly an HBO Max level guy, old shows like Sopranos and all that." They're very different audiences too. So I never liked the first merger in the when that came about, and then once we got into this, I was like, "Oh, okay, alright." It's between Netflix, Comcast, and Paramount, and Paramount's just been awful in its own way too. They've had so much debt too, and it just was not have it's probably the worst UI interface out of all the streaming apps too. Like, anytime I've tried to, like, interact with it, I was like, this is like 2000 something bad. This is not even in the ballpark of, like, a modern app functionality, especially when you use it on TV. I'm like, "I don't know how you guys are using this." It's bad. Like, after this many complaints, you'd at least see something happen, but it hasn't. And I don't know, Paramount has just not been good with its own originals too. Like, Halo is probably their biggest one, and Halo had just been through so much before it even made it to this, the small screen that you're like, "Oh, anything should be decent at this point if they really finally pushed it forward," and it wasn't. It really just turned off so many Halo fans, and it's kind of a shame because basically in the same, like, time span, we got a Fallout show that's preparing to do a second season after its most famous game and, like, confirm some details of, like, this storyline is mostly canon, this isn't, and all that, and people are just in love with it, right? And especially in the landscape where a lot of these video game IPs have had shows that have kind of failed. Amazon has just done much better here. So it's like, okay, what does Paramount have? It could have had something slightly uniquely different here. It's not something truly fantasy. It's not something big budget superhero, but it could be its own little niche that's exploding more and more as video game adaptations start taking a hold of, like, the small screen and the big screen. Completely failed there, right? Like, now it became like, I think I saw it was a couple weeks that on Netflix that the Halo show, after being leased out, went, like, number 1 or something just because people were so curious, and that just shows the power of Netflix, that any show can theoretically get so big on that, and someone in the world will, like, start something in their country, in their place of origin, and it'll explode out there, and these other streaming services just don't have that, and yes, the streaming bubble has burst, but that technology, that distribution system is not going anywhere anytime soon. It's just that we're not necessarily gonna get a Stranger Things or a Squid Games like show where the budget gets ramped up season after season. It'll just be more closer to Star Trek Next Generations and stuff like that, where you're like more episodes, faster turnarounds, less VFX, all this and that. So now that we're in this point in time that, like, Warner Brothers has, like, fully just been sold off, right, to Netflix, it's not great. I wish it was Comcast. I think that was honestly the best bet, but Comcast, of the 3, all of them not being great, they fully have pulled out. They're not here to even make any sort of hostile bet or anything. They're just like, "Yeah, we're out." And from what I've read, Netflix offered a lot of cash, and I think the starting stock value is at 30, which is pretty strong, right? And Paramount's counter, this whole hostile bid, is like for like 168 billion, but the company's value itself is 68, and that's where a lot of Saudi money and a lot of Middle Eastern money is coming into play. It has some really weird political connotations I don't wanna even get into with the backers behind that. But so I'm just not a fan of Paramount even trying to get into this whole space either. Netflix isn't great. I agree. I'm really hoping though that, like, after what we've seen with, like, K-pop, Demon Hunters, the fact that they're just doing freely, basically, like, concession tickets to, the Stranger Things finale in December. It's only $11. They're like, "It's all going to go to theaters. We don't really care. We just want people to, like, engage and maybe use that for their marketing and stuff." Maybe they're hearing the right stuff. Maybe they're gonna hear people like Fincher and everybody who's been making movies for them, Ryan Johnson, all that, be like, "Hey, you're already doing Greta's, Narnia films in IMAX 1 week, like, we want that sort of same thing now that you've really got a whole different studio system that will be kept mostly separate with Zaslav, at least around for the first year or so." It's like, this is a great opportunity for, you to merge your system as needed, but still actually take a real step into the future of film, which is again the past of film, which is based in the movie theaters, right? We've seen Disney already make that huge shift, right? It's like, hey, we can't just make another TV show spinoff of a big property franchise. We have to put it in theaters like a Moana 2, stitch it together. Doesn't matter how bad it looks. Bam, Lilo and Stitch was meant to be straight for streaming movie. Put it in theaters, $1 billion for both of them, right? It's not like people aren't wanting this sort of stuff. It's just you have to be smart about where your money is going to come from. And streaming just doesn't have that anymore because streaming truly was never profitable in the way that, at least even with Hollywood accounting, movies are. So not super happy, but if we start to hear more about like them being willing to at least give like exclusive IMAX windows, maybe 30 days at least in theaters, right? I don't think like Netflix and its CEO are gonna like lose out and just go with the old ways. I think the whole point is that they have won a significant victory over the old studio system. But to be, once you're with all these big dogs, once you're with the politics that come with movie making and all that, and now that you're really not just a data company, now you have a proper studio behind you with all these big IPs that are really about to explode again, like the DC universes with, uh, the movie theaters again, right? I do think they're gonna have to at least be like, okay, we understand it now, and we have to play this smarter. S- If a show and movie's bad, not good, right? Like we've seen it before with other studios, Universal, right? If a movie starts bombing in theaters, instead of giving, like, the 30 days before going to digital, it'll be there within 2 weeks on digital, right? It's not like Netflix doesn't have a chance to adopt some sort of model like that that's performance-based, right? That actually, if anything, also lets them put pressure on movies to be like, "Hey, marketing teams, production team, if you really want this movie to be here, guaranteed 30 days, be smart about this. Prove to us why this should stay in theaters." It's not great, right? Because a lot of movies do end up legging out and finding an audience later if they stick around, but maybe this is a way to at least ensure that, like, hey, if this is a compromise, everybody's going to be fighting for these 30 days. Hopefully it works out. I'm going to be optimistic. I'm not, again, happy in the first place that this is having to happen again so rapidly, but maybe with a pure cash flow that Netflix has, maybe with the fact that they are still the top dog in streaming, with the willingness that they've shown to start doing movie releases in theaters for a lot of their auteur directors and stuff, maybe we are seeing Netflix actually, as it's become big dog, adapt to the ways of the old ones.
And I think this signals the one thing it does signal is that if Netflix has basically been what HBO was in the 90s and early 2000s, right? It's a TV company that makes movies every once in a while. And that might be sounding kind of disparaging to Netflix's films, and they aren't, again, all bad, right? They do have contracts, like you said, with Scorsese. They have contracts with Fincher. They've got contracts with uh, now the Narnia movies. If you see the exhibition coming from somebody like Warner Brothers, who has been kind of the big victors of this year, right? Like Disney always has one of the top movies of the year, but Minecraft, Weapons, Sinners, those movies wouldn't be what they are without theatrical exhibition. I think pulling those would be a huge mistake, and I think what post COVID has solidified is that you can't make more money being a streamer than being a theatrical releaser, but you can make a huge amount of money doing both. And so Netflix might actually, maybe they're telling the truth and they want to get in on the theatrical game. I think it makes a lot more sense. It creates a huge ecosystem for your releases. People have shown that they won't subscribe to streaming services for a movie, but they will subscribe to watch a movie they've seen before over and over and over again. And so if the theaters are the place that you get those people to discover those films, and then Netflix is where they rewatch them, which is what it used to be really when Netflix was the only game in town, right? They lived off of people rewatching. Now you've created a nice ecosystem that actually really does fit what you want to do, but nobody's going to subscribe to Netflix for new release films. It just really has not been the case, basically, in the entire run of streaming. And so I think if they're playing their cards right, they continue with theatrical exhibition because it's a great way to get those movies to become things that people subscribe to Netflix for. They will subscribe to rewatch. They won't subscribe to watch something new. TV has proven over years and years and years to be the reason people subscribe to streaming because it's long form engaging content. What Netflix has done so well is continue to put something out that every time your show you're watching ends, you start the next one because there's more on Netflix to watch. And that's what companies like Disney Plus, even Max, a lot of these companies have had a very hard time holding subscribers because they can't get the content out fast enough and they don't have the backlog of TV for people to watch. So Netflix has the leg up on all of that. And so if they are able to keep that theatrical model, it could be a very big thing for a lot of these IPs. I
Yeah.
mean, not that they really need much more help, but specifically if we want to talk about DC, that's a IP that has had a huge jump this past year in terms of its brand loyalty and its reclaimed brand faith with fans. I think having a Netflix be able to even get it to more people now makes what Superman 2 was probably already going to be $1 billion movie, makes it like a guaranteed $1 billion movie if people are discovering it on Netflix. So all of that is big for the IPs. It just really is only concerning as a movie fan. Like I think the business wise, this gives everybody a lot of prospects. But as a movie fan, as somebody who loves theatrical and you can't argue with the results, the results are that theatrical makes these studios way more money than having their movies on streaming. I hope that we continue to see things in the theaters. And I already heard about Christopher Nolan meeting with them to talk about that. So we'll see what happens there.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for the question. And when you also asked about rivaling Disney, I mean, I think the Netflix already is way bigger than Disney Plus. A combination of Warner Brothers, which are, even though Disney has Star Wars and Marvel and Disney, Warner Brothers arguably has the biggest group of IPs in the entirety of movies and TV. I mean, if you want to include all their properties from HBO to DC to the 100 years of movies they've made, I mean, they have so many things on their under their umbrella that I would say right now they already rival Disney, and I think they would probably be above Disney if the two combined, in terms of how much they have to offer. So we will see. I think Disney's thing that keeps Disney alive all the time and like constantly people revisiting the classics are the theme parks, and we'll see if Netflix actually wants to get into that game with Six Flags. But it'll be interesting to see. And then, as Permafrost points out, the Department of Justice would have to approve the sale as well if the shareholders decide to push it through. But these sales have come up so much over the last few years. It will most likely go through, even if it's fought, and even though like the prospects of Netflix and Warner Brothers combining has been met with a little more resistance than Paramount and Warner Brothers combining. But I don't really see a world in which they don't combine. A I think a Comcast NBC Universal combination with Warner Brothers would have been a lot more concerning to the antitrust stuff than or the anti-monopoly stuff than this acquisition, because Netflix doesn't really own any major they don't own any other major studios. They only basically are Netflix, right? They don't have real
Right.
theatrical exhibition. They don't own theme parks. They don't own all the stuff. A comic book company. They don't own all the stuff that Warner Brothers already owns and that NBC Universal would own or Disney would own. So I think it's a lot easier to pass through overall, but we'll see how it goes. These things always do drag out. Even the Disney Fox acquisition lasted like a year or more before it was fully finalized. So it'll be interesting. But yeah, thanks for that question. It is definitely the hot button one of the week. We'll take your next question here, and then we'll probably move on to our next few books, and then we'll come back to the questions right after that. Brandon asks, non-Star Wars question: do you think Beyond the Spider-Verse will release in 2027? Before or after Avengers Secret Wars and the delayed Mahershala Ali Blade movie? Well, it was absolutely released before Blade because Blade is not gonna end up coming out. I didn't know it was still scheduled for 2027. As far as I've heard, they have not they don't have anything going with Blade right now. So, I don't think it's coming out next year. We can pretty much say next year now for 2027, which kind of crazy. It will also be coming out before Secret Wars if it comes out in 27. We haven't heard much recently, but the fact that it's been delayed so many times and that it's been on the 2027 release date for at least a year now, if not more, I'm pretty confident that it will be 2027, and I'm pretty sure it is scheduled for that early summer release. So I think with Secret Wars being, that last the weekend before Christmas, that Avatar, originally Disney Star Wars, Lord of the Rings weekend, and now Doomsday also being that weekend next year, I think it will be out. If it comes out in 27, it will be out before Secret Wars. And I still am pretty confident that it will come out before Secret Wars.
Yeah, I agree on the Blade stuff. I think from what I've read too, at this point, it's a firmly post Secret Wars, whatever it changes about the state of the universe, state of the characters. It seems like that's where it's going to be. We know at one point it was set in the 20s because Sinners production bought majority of the costumes for that when they were ready to start shooting. And then strikes happen, and then they're like, "Yeah, we're not gonna do this anyways. Like, this doesn't really seem like it's working." So they were pretty freaking close, right? So I know Mia Gott's talked about it too, how she was excited, and she's like, it seems like they're going a different way, but I'm still kind of in contact with them. Hopefully, get to do something still related to the property and all. So yeah, it's a shame. It's a shame. I mean, I'd love it to have seen Black Knight and everything going on with Blade and having a Midnight Suns at this point, especially since, we also got Moon Knight and that we're still waiting on if we're gonna get a season 2 or not, especially with the caliber of actor as Oscar Isaac is. So far, it doesn't seem like it's meant to be. It seems like the multiverse era, instead of really focusing on characters that really made sense for the multiverse, ended up just being everybody can fit into this Marvel cinematic universe that is now also on the small screen, and that was one of the biggest mistakes, right? If it was characters that we've already seen like Wanda, right? Scarlet Witch getting her shows and stuff like that. Those probably have legs, but some of these newer characters should have been directly tied to stuff multiverse related and should have been in the movies from the start, and that would probably have been better overall, even if we still had these ups and downs. But yeah, it's a bit of a shame, I will say. Um, but yeah, I as far as Beyond the Spider Verse, I think they did announce today, right? Like, it's supposed to be before Secret Wars at this point, or I'm gonna assume yes. I think especially with how big Secret Wars is gonna be shaping up to be, right? Like, with the fact that Doomsday is gonna really bring back so many of the Fox X-Men actors. I know some of them haven't been announced yet too, but I'm pretty sure they'll at least cameo here, if not be in Secret Wars. Probably Tobey Maguire comes back as his Peter Parker, and then we probably see Andrew Garfield again too, because there's just no way you don't wanna have Peter 1, Peter 2, and Peter 3 all back in action together, and some other characters. I don't think we're gonna get to the point of getting, like, a Ben Affleck Daredevil. It's pretty insane that we even got the Elektra cameo from Jennifer Garner, but, I think we'll see a lot of stuff show up by the time we get to Secret Wars, and even if the animated Spider-Verse films have been really their own separate universe, it is still multiverse stuff. Spider-Verse is a multiverse. I wouldn't be shocked if, especially now that we know it's, like, possibly happening with Brand New Day, right? But I don't know, like, who's Sadie Sink playing? Nobody. Mm, I don't know. I forgot I forgot which character exactly I was thinking about, but yeah, I mean, not terribly surprised, that, like, that movie's also making things pretty confusing. Um, so, yeah, I don't know. This is a weird thing where Spider-Verse, I think, theoretically, like, since we've already seen, like, the Prowler cameo of Donald Glover, after being connected to Spider-Man: Homecoming, showing up there, like, why wouldn't there be at least a character who, like, shows up from the Spider-Verse films, even if it's not, like, the main ca trio characters, right? Somebody from the films shows up and then gets to have a role in Secret Wars or something, right? I think that'd be pretty cool. Uh, it would be crazy to say this. What if she's like Gwen Stacy, Sadie Sink, right? Like, we don't really know exactly who and what she's playing, and that's always gonna be the question there, but there is synergy between the fact that Sony literally owns still the production and everything behind the Spider-Man films, just in conjunction with supervision with Marvel to fit in. I wouldn't be surprised if it all kind of links together through those live action and Spider-Verse films. So I still think that it holds its spot. I think Spot as a villain, I need to see again because man, it'll be like what 5 years, 4 years since
Mm.
Cross Spider-Verse at that point. But it'll be exciting. I'm excited for that movie. I think it has a chance to come out before because I think there is a chance that it'll be connected to everything in Secret Wars and what's going on with Brand New Day for Spider-Man.
I think that Miles will be in Secret Wars. Like I think the whole purpose of Secret Wars originally was to condense the universe and to bring characters who were popular in the Ultimate timeline into the main 616 timeline. That was one of the main purposes of that event. And so when we're talking about the Hickman version, at least. And so I think that Miles, obviously, he was at the time easily the most popular character in the Ultimate version
Oh yeah.
of Spider-Man and most popular character in the Ultimate universe. So I would be kind of shocked if we don't try to find a way to at least tease Miles in Secret Wars. I mean, they have so many things going on that I can't say it's a guarantee, but I would be shocked if they haven't at least set it up for the future of live action. I mean, I think that would be one of the great ways to add something fresh to Tom Holland's Spider-Man as well, is to create that synergy. It doesn't have to be, a redux of what we've seen in the Spider-Verse movies, but what we have seen in even like the Spider-Man games, that relationship between Peter and Miles works extremely well and it fits. And you can have both characters and tell compelling stories with both. And so I think they would like to get there. And I think it allows you to then eventually take a break from Tom Holland for a little while and continue with Miles and then come back to Tom Holland one day. So, you can keep going forever kind of with that. So we'll see where it goes. But yes, it is scheduled to come out June 20th, 2027 currently. And I would be shocked if they changed away from that. Like I said earlier, they've changed it too many times already to where like they've been at this date for a good year or so now. I would be surprised if they change it. And that date worked for them last time. I looked up Across the Spider Verse because I knew it was June. It was the first weekend of June when it came out, June 2nd. So it's a date they're comfortable with. It's time they're comfortable with. And I think 2026 should hopefully be a big year for Spider Man. Get Spider Man back, in people's minds and just in general superhero movies. Hopefully, take a step in 2026 with. I mean, you're gonna have Spider-Man, then you're gonna have Doomsday, then you're gonna have Beyond, and then you're gonna have Secret Wars. So it's gonna be some of the most hyped up superhero movies we've had in a while. I think they would be kind of missing a big moment in superhero fandom if they moved off that date. I mean, it would obviously take something significant to get them off of it. So that's where I think that will go. But let's move back to the books here because we do have to get through six more, and we're already 40 minutes into the stream. So we're going to talk about the next two for tonight's ranking, and that is going to be beginning with the Acolyte Wayseeker. Most people didn't read this book. We could tell by our coverage of it, but also just in general, there's been no conversation around these Acolyte tie-in books. Those are the ones that people probably forget even came out this year. And it was such a weird decision to release Acolyte prequel books a year after the show came out. And right now, recently, we have the Outlaws prequel book coming out next in February. And it just seems like publishing is so far behind these trends. Like even though the Acolyte wasn't good and overall people didn't really like it, and Outlaws came out to mediocre reception. Some people like it more than others. It has become a better game now than it was when released. The fact that you don't capitalize on the initial hype of the thing just makes no sense, really. I mean, back when we got Rogue One, right? We got a book that came out before the movie came out. We've gotten Jedi Battle Scars came out before Survivor, and those books did well because people were excited for what was coming rather than having to go back to something they've already seen. When it goes to Wayseeker, it didn't help either that it was one of the strangest books I've read in Star Wars canon in the way it was written. This was written in two different perspectives. It had a first person perspective for Vernestra, and then it had a third person perspective for everybody else in the book. So each chapter almost alternated perspectives. We review books via audiobook most of the time because we get audiobooks early for review. It's incredibly difficult to keep that together when you have a narrator who's narrating everything and you have two different points of view. So this is one I would not recommend listening to. I would recommend reading it. Um, but I thought that was a really odd decision and one that just pulled me out of the book almost every time because you have different narrators giving different voices to everything. Coupling that with the fact that Wayseeker spoils some things from Trials of the Jedi, which came out after Wayseeker. Also, the fact that it um, is a lot more High Republic than it is Acolyte, so really feels almost in no way connected to Acolyte other than focusing on two characters that are in the show, but those versions of the characters are nothing like their show counterparts, and it takes place 20 years before the Acolyte, so it's really not much of a prequel at all to that story. It made it even more forgettable. It made it something that just kind of came and went, something that I wasn't excited for when it came out, and it kind of just met that. And then on top of that, it is a short, very fast paced, simple, kind of basic story. It doesn't stand out in the storytelling it tries to give. I think it fails in a lot of the things it tries to do in a more unique way. So this was not a book I enjoyed. I think it's one of the weaker Star Wars canon books overall. Definitely one of the weakest of the year. It's very close between this one and the other Acolyte book. I'll spoil that right now for my worst of the year, but I gave this one seventh for now out of the eight. I just don't think it was very good and ultimately let me down.
Yeah, I mean, I echo everything you're saying. It just was a weird book in general. I liked Vernestra a lot more in this book, but that's because she's High Republic Vernestra, which doesn't really make sense for it being just 20 years before. Regardless of how Moralian's age and all that, it's like you're like, "Oh, okay, sure." She could like, and enjoy this relationship with Nandara and what it brings out of her, and maybe some of the younger stuff comes out, maybe some of the older stuff is there from the start, but it's not really there. That's the biggest disappointment, and I also have this issue too with this book, and it's an issue with a lot of canon books. There isn't really a villain that's, like, huge or powerful here because they can't. It's just, the story doesn't allow for that to happen quite yet. So we're there. We still don't really get a lot of stuff with her and Chimera really put out there, again, because this is for her. I don't know. It's just a weird book. I don't know. The first person, third person switch was weird in general. I guess, like, in a way, you could say, like, you read Vernestra's voice in first person because she's not trying to reveal all this stuff about herself, but sometimes when you're doing stuff in first person, you kinda want that to be revealed, right? I don't know, I just found it weird jumping between her and Indara. I didn't mind Indara being totally different because there really isn't a lot about Indara, and she is a human, so I could see it, like, it could work for me, but there also just wasn't enough that I was like, "That is her, that's what I remember," because the show doesn't really give her much, even in the flashback, she's very stoic, she's very much like, "We're gonna cover it up, we're gonna deal with it, let's move forward, it happened, and this is what we have to take to the grave," right? That's sort of her mentality, even until her dying breath in the show, so I like their dynamic, I actually really liked a lot of it, I liked some of the arena fighting, but the villain was just whatever, one note, and on top of it, this book strangely came out right before Trials of the Jedi, and it spoils a character from the High Republic showing up there, and I love that character. showing up here. I enjoyed a lot of the banter with her and Vernestra. I was like, "Wow, we're finally getting somewhere with this book." And then it's like, "Oh, wait, like, doesn't this then change how I look at Trials of the Jedi? Like, well, what's the point of this? And like, why is she also alive? Like, why did she necessarily have to be alive for this book just so Vernestra has a companion?" Yeah, I don't know. It's weird. It's a weird book. It's definitely my 7th on my list.
The next one that came out was arguably the most anticipated book of the year and one of the most anticipated books of the last 5, 6 years for Star Wars. It was Trials of the Jedi, the final book in the High Republic, and one that had a lot of things it had to deliver on. And I thought it lived up to almost all of them. I think by the end of the book, Trials of the Jedi remains one of the most satisfying finales of any of these big initiatives for Star Wars. Maybe not quite on the level of something like the Unifying Force, but something that's still in the upper echelon of the big Star Wars event storytelling finales. And the fact that it was able to reach those peaks both for story and for character is really a testament to the initiative, but also a testament to Charles Soule, who I thought kickstarted this initiative in incredible fashion with Light of the Jedi. And wrapping it up here, I thought he did just a fantastic job. I was very happy with most of what he does here. The book can have some pacing issues in moments. There are a lot of things that tie into like the Battle of Iriadu and stuff like that that feel more like checking off some obligatory plot lines that are started in the larger initiative. But when the book focuses on the Luminous Nine, when it focuses on the characters that we've grown through this initiative with, the Avars, the Elzars, the Marchion Rose, this book does all of that fantastically. Like those things all work, and that's what really needed to work for Trials of the Jedi. It was always going to have an uphill climb with how many plot points were out there in the High Republic, but the fact that it honed in on its most important characters, its most important elements, and it gave us a really satisfying conclusion for all of them. Of course, also a Marchion Ro who was scary for the first time in a couple years, really since the Eye of Darkness. He's been such a boring character in phase three. And the fact that Charles Soule then brought him back to the highs of phase one and early phase three, I thought was a big necessity for the success of Trials. And I thought it lived up to that. Overall, I think the ending worked very well too. There were, a handful of characters, a handful of things I wanted more from. I wanted to know more. I wanted even more post book stuff, some more epilogue stuff. But hopefully we get some of that over the years as we continue to build off the High Republic. But I thought Trials lived up to my hype and it met most of my expectations. And it's the book from 2025 that I will remember most after the year is over. So for me, this is my favorite book of the year. I think it's a very strong, fitting conclusion to an initiative I've really enjoyed for the last 4 years.
I mean, when we look at all of Phase 3, it really is carried by one author, and that's George Mann. So Charles Soule kind of returning after starting out this whole initiative, you're like, okay, I think I'll get a good book, but will I get a book that this whole initiative deserves? Will I get a book that satisfies everything in Phase 3? Will it satisfy all the adult novel storylines? And I think it did. It definitely did, right? And I say this now having reread Temptation of the Force. That was the book that I almost had to kinda rush through for a review, and I felt that one was probably the weakest adult novel, but I think what Charles Soule did is that he took the best parts of each adult novel, what George Mann did in Eye of Darkness, what, Tessa Gratton did in, Temptation of the Force, and just, like, what are the big storylines, who the big players in Phase 3, and he's like, "Yep, I'm putting them all together. This is like, a one-way trip to Planet X, and let's see what's gonna happen out of there." And yeah, there were some brutal deaths. There were some brutal ends to a lot of our favorite characters that we've seen in all mediums. And that's like another thing. It's fantastic what he achieved in actually like making this be a true multimedia initiative end, right? Because we do have the other multimedia respond to this. This doesn't feel like phase one where all the multimedia had to like converge into Fallen Star. This one feels like this is the story and everybody else reacts to it. And I think that was just a much more sound approach. So by letting it be the story, it doesn't necessarily have to have so much and everything going on and stuff that feels like, oh, it should have been here. It's not. No, it just told exactly what it needed to, taking the big players or at least representatives of each story that matter. And actually pretty tactfully so. Like I'd say like the High Republic comics, they have one of the twins actually show up as a character and their unique bond in the Force, right? Their unique sensibilities that actually services the team, that actually services the Jedi on this mission. So I thought Charles made some great selections. Obviously, you have your big hitters that have been carrying Phase 3, not in just the adult novels, but the young adult novels with like Reed Silas showing up in Aslan Rel. But yes, I thought the team construction was really good. I thought everything about this being like a ticking clock in a way that Fallen Star kind of was, but this being like, yeah, this is the end at all. Like this is not just we don't know what's about to happen. It's like we know what's gonna happen. We just don't know when and how exactly. And then yet there was still a surprise. There was still a big surprise with everything around the Nameless and all that, and it got into that weird force weirdness that I love about, like, the Mortis arc and stuff like that. It feels perfectly in line with that stuff. That's something that I've always, like, was unsure about the Nameless, unsure about the Blight and everything, stuff that didn't necessarily click or link together as well as I thought it could've, but then when you read Trials of Jedi, you're like, "Of course, these people were all just laying stepping stones, and Soul was the one who's gonna deliver it." So absolutely love the book. I I love the relationships and how they were unfolded in Phase 3 and how they're concluded by Charles Soule. I think the only thing I never truly loved was, like, the interlude chapters, but I still think that, like, it is a pretty interesting perspective to show you just how bad it's getting in certain parts of the galaxy until the Jedi really complete and succeed in their mission. Markion Rowe, what a fascinating, psychology, fascinating ideology all put together in what he fully commits to by the end. You're like, "Oh my god, this is not a villain. This is like an enigma almost." And you're like, "Why is this the thing that's putting the whole galaxy at stake almost, right?" And it's like, "Well, because he's gonna do something even crazier than everything he's done so far." I liked him as a villain quite a bit. I really did, and I felt like some of the drop off that was there in Phase 3, it just shot back up with how he was handled here. So Soul delivered on every front. This is easily my first book and my rankings for 2025.
Well, we're gonna go back to your guys' questions for a little while, and then we have 4 more books to talk about tonight. But keep sending those in and let us know what you thought of the 2025 Star Wars books. Let us know your rankings, or just let us know which ones you liked or disliked when we discuss them. I know we had some comments here earlier. Critical Thinker said, "Didn't realize you guys ranked Mask of Fear so highly based on your review. Interesting. I might check it out then." Yeah, definitely check it out. We really enjoyed it. And then also said, I don't think anyone read the Acolyte tie-in books. I've heard almost no discussion about them anywhere. Yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, our reviews didn't do that well. For book reviews have been fairly good on our channel, and those just did not do well. So Wayseeker did so bad we didn't cover Crystal Crown for our channel. We both read it, but didn't cover it on the channel because didn't think it was going to do very well. Um,
Yeah.
Oh, you meant Master of Evil. Yeah, we haven't talked about Master of Evil yet, but we will get there at the very end, I guess. And then also, Critical Thinker says, I wonder how the OG writer of Vernestra handled the personality shift in the show, if they tried to explain it or just ignored it, wrote High Republic era Vernestra. Yeah, it's the latter. She doesn't. It's one of the reasons I didn't really enjoy the book, because I was really hoping that with the Vernestra book written by Justina Ireland, who I think has delivered her best High Republic work as a solo writer. When she's written Vernestra, I was expecting a little bit more on just how she turns into who she is in the Acolyte. And even one of the things this is a slight spoiler, but you're probably never going to read the book, and I don't think anybody really cares. Um, in the book, it's referenced that the book takes place after her falling out with Chimere. So you would expect her to be a little bit more like the version we see in the Acolyte, if that's the thing that turned her into this jaded, upset all the time person. But obviously that's not the thing that turned her into that, because she's still like the High Republic version of Vernestra in the book. So it just kind of doesn't fit with the versions of the character we've seen. It doesn't really fit with the story overall. I think it's a story that maybe needed to take place 50 years before the Acolyte or so, 40 years before the Acolyte or so, not 20. Because if that already happened, I don't know what in her character journey is going to end up shifting her again to, becoming the version we see in the show. So Justina Ireland just really seems to have not enjoyed that version and it's like, screw it. If I'm going to write Vernestra again, I'm going to write the version I want to write. And I respect that for sure. I just think you're an Acolyte tie-in book, so you kind of have to help build on the Acolyte, not build on other things we've read. So that's certainly one of the bigger disappointments of the book.
Yeah, I mean, to be frank, this does feel like a heir to the Jedi almost situation where you're like, well, do I really need to know anything about this book? And is this even that good a book? I know Liam really hates it, right? But the nice thing about it is that you can just read the Star Wars 2015 line and it basically is the exact same timeline. You're like, okay, I don't have to really care about this book too much. That's kind of how Justina probably handled this. It was like, yeah, at some point, something's gonna be a massive overhaul around everything with the Acolyte and its connections to the High Republic and its connections to the prequels and Plagueis and everything. So you can read it. It's gonna, do some justice to one High Republic character. It's not Vernestra, unfortunately. It makes Indara a little bit bigger of a character. It doesn't do anything that it can't be overridden? Probably not, and I think the fact that she's like, "I'm also done writing Star Wars after this," like and you can't blame her. She wrote a lot of the young adult novels, she wrote the majority of the junior novels, and yeah, I mean, I think she got worn out with it. I don't think she's done Star Wars. I think she did The Last Shot before as her first Star Wars book.
That was Daniel Jose
That
Older.
okay, that was Daniel Jose.
She
So she
she
did
did a
something.
Ray junior novel tie-in book
Right.
before High Republic. I think that was her only thing.
Yeah, and I think jumping from that into, like, this whole initiative and the focus of, like, suddenly, like, you aren't just, like, crafting a junior novel, you've had a book that's broken out from this, like, and a whole initiative, right? Got as much praise, if not more, than the young adult written by a big hitter in Claudia Gray, and with a character that's just gone, like, supernova all of a sudden, and then you hear somebody else who, again, I everything about The Acolyte, why it sucks is that what's her name again? I'm blanking on, Katie, Headland,
Leslie
what's her
Headland.
name? Leslie Headland, right? Everything about her characters, she was like, "Yeah, I did it from, like, my RPG campaign I was running." Like, Yord is quite literally my character. And I think those characters, if you just look at it as that, don't forget about the High Republic, forget prequels. I think they're actually fairly strong characterizations. It's just they go nowhere with them once they're introduced, right? Or if they do have a moment of going through with them, it's spread over 2 episodes that should have been 1 or needed an extra episode, stuff like that, right? It makes a lot of sense for an RPG campaign, not so much for how it was paced and how it was cut to the bone, like Book of Boba Fett, Robert Rodriguez episodes were. So that was a big bummer there. But then with Vernestra's rise as a character, with the fact like we have to make this High Republic tie it in and attract that huge subset of the audience. What did they do? It's Lucasfilm Story Group, which has had its ups and downs, hasn't necessarily been like this huge pivotal force since the Last Jedi. Suddenly is saying like, oh yeah, yeah, like this is a character that you could use. Like, maybe she had a whole different character in mind, but this is a character that could have fit in the role. But I unfortunately, I don't think the Lucasfilm Story Group understood that, like, for Vernestra to truly be given justice, she needed to be a character throughout the show, right? And be involved more directly. She only gets anywhere near close to her characterization in the High Republic in that last episode, and that's why I like her a lot in that last episode. It's just everything else leading into it, you're like, oh, why is middle management Jedi happening with her, right? So big bummer, unfortunate, but, that's just kinda how it is, and I hope Justina comes back and she actually gets to write more about Vernestra, like, I don't want this to be her concluding act, 'cause, spoiler for Trials of Jedi, Vernestra's not a huge character in that, right? So for this being her concluding High Republic story, I'm like, if she's gonna be alive this much longer, I really want at least her to be given the chance to write like a Lucino Plagueis level novel with Chimere and stuff like that, right? Like at least allow that turn to happen in a massive book of sorts. Like if that's gonna be her adult novel, I think it makes quite a lot of sense.
Yeah, in response to the question at the bottom of do they actually reference the Chimere thing? Yeah, they actually do. They don't talk about it in any great detail, but there's like a scene with Vernestra where something happens and she's like, I haven't felt this low since, my apprentice left and we had that falling out. And there's a lot of times where things happen to her and she like reflects back on, oh, this is another time I failed, just like I failed with my apprentice. There's a lot of those types of things. It doesn't get in any detail, but it's enough to reference to like it happened a while ago, which also makes Chimere like a lot older than you think he is in the Acolyte, unless he was like 10 or something when it happens and he was really young because this book takes place 20 years before the Acolyte. So
Yeah.
he's in his like mid 30s maybe in the Acolyte at the youngest.
Well, to be fair, Manny Jacinto's 40 something and he looks great for his age, so
Yeah.
I could see that, but yeah, it's definitely a weird placement.
Yeah, I think well, I feel like especially with the romance they set up, I feel like he's supposed to be kind of early 30s,
Yeah,
late
he's
20s.
it's weird.
And the timeline doesn't really work. But yeah, it's odd, but we'll see what they do to try to fix it up. I mean, it could be just something they ignore in the future. And we've seen them do that a lot recently. Back to the top. So this was Critical Thinker's original first question. Do you guys think they could have met or do you think the Jedi could have met Crate again between Crucible and Legacy? I think they could have built up to a big pre-Legacy conflict between the Jedi and the one Sith if they kept going. And having Jaina beat Crate in a 1v1, forcing him to go into hiding until Legacy would have been a cool way to explain his absence for so long, as well as establishing her as the new head of the Order. Yeah, I think that would have been really cool, and I think it's something they were probably planning to do at some point. I'm sure with how pivotal of a role Crate plays in Fate of the Jedi, which was one of the last things to come out. It was the last initiative to come out before Legends ended, but it was one of the last post Return of the Jedi stories of Legends. And we know they were building towards the Sword of the Jedi books and all of that. I'm sure at some point they would have brought Crate back because Crate, his absence between those two stories is one of the important points of how he's able to rise via legacy. So I'm sure it's something they would have built to at some point. I'm not 100% sure if Jaina beating him would have been specifically in the cards, but I think something along the lines of that forced exile would have absolutely been something they would have worked towards.
I think some of this is also because you've been pretty adamant that you don't want Jaina to be tied to the Fell Empire, right? And I think that's fair. I wouldn't want that to happen either, but we do know that it's not like Jagged Fell. At least the way so much of later EU is definitely written more about like bloodlines and everything matters when, especially once they insert midichlorians into that context. It really does seem like Jaina at least had a child with Jagged to start off this whole lineage of fellow emperors and empresses having the Force, right? So, yeah, I mean, I know you're also bringing up the Lost Tribe. I think the Lost Tribe would have been a little bit more functionally something that would have happened. It just, yeah, Legacy of the Force. I just, I know you bring up details about Denny not liking felt like yeah, yeah, true. I'm look, ideally, I think that would be nice if Jaina became head of the order. I don't think she necessarily is in the cards with her title as Sword of the Jedi. I think she's supposed to be more like quite literally like the Sword of the Jedi. She's supposed to cut through the mess, cut through everything that's become a huge muck basically since the new Jedi Order and stand as the guard of the Jedi. But I don't know if she's necessarily like Grand Master, at least the way she's written by the end of the story. Like she so much of the end of the Legacy of the Force is just it just kind of leaves her in limbo, right? I'm like, okay, all right, that's she killed her brother. Now how does she move forward, right? I don't know. I'm not a fan, obviously, of how Legacy of the Force handles a lot of these characters. I'm not a fan of much of like the ultimate resolutions of everything that happens in Darkness and everything that happens in Legacy after Unifying Force. But I could see it be pretty interesting, if like Crate went up against Jaina. It's just that when we know it probably didn't happen because there's no real, like, sense of, like, Crate I mean, I guess the legacy comics do at least leave some space for Crate to have fought Jaina at some point. I just don't know if it's something that, like, the whole order was behind. I think it would've been more closer to, like, how an Obi-Wan fought him in the desert, like, how, when he's rising up or when he's part of a movement towards becoming the true one Sith, he is just a contender at that point. He is just another person. But like once we have a proper one Sith in place, when he has like everybody with their weird like homegrown lightsabers and stuff like that, once that whole structure's in place, I don't I just don't see how Jaina at that point is fighting him because then she would have to be the master, and I just don't see the story having led her there. She would have had I think regardless, even if she does become head of the New Jedi Order at some point, she takes a pretty bit massive detour to, like, almost help navigate and maybe shape up the Imperial Knights before she leaves or something like that with Jagged Fell. I think if you wanna have her still be connected to Fells while not being a Fell, right, in a lot of ways, not being the mother of the Fell Empire, she needs to peacefully split away, and I don't know. I feel like they just wrote themselves into a weird corner with that, with how Legacy Comics really made it like that. They're Force sensitive. It's like, oh, Jagged Fell and Legacy of the Force likes Jaina and they like each other. What, oh, is that one put one and one together? What does that mean, right? It's a weird place that they left her. So much of later EU just does a disservice to her. I think it's just an unfortunate reality.
Next question from Critical Thinker says, putting aside what we want as fans, do you think what do you think is the most likely route Disney will go with the OT cast? Continue deep faking animation, books, or nothing? Do you think they'll still try to make them a big part of the Thrawn storyline or relegate them to cameos and replace their roles in that story with the Rebels cast? Will they be treated as main characters of the narrative, or do you think they will allow, or they will throw all their cards on the post sequel era and leave the OT storyline as a side thing? They're going to get to it at some point. I've said this for years, and when this question has kind of come up in variations in the past, I've said over and over again that Luke, Han, and Leia are the lifeblood of Star Wars. It's just the thing that pretty much any generation of Star Wars identifies specifically with the brand. Those characters and Darth Vader. Like that is Star Wars to everyone. Everybody else has other things in Star Wars they like, but that is the core of Star Wars. And so they'll never let that stuff go. It's too valuable and too profitable in some capacity for them. And it's the main reason that we haven't seen it in books is because they want to figure out how do we make this work in the way that makes us the most money and gets the most eyes on it because they know that if they tell a story about Luke, Han, or Leia, people are going to watch, people are going to read, they will be interested. I mean, you see it with something like or Master of Evil, a book about Darth Vader in a kind of time period that we've explored 100 times over, with the story that ultimately a lot of people have been disappointed with, that wasn't a pure Vader story. People have still been obsessing over it and reading it and interested in it. Every time they go back to the well with these OT characters, people enjoy it. So, no, I don't think they will just let it fade into the distance. When it comes to film, maybe because they seem committed to this post sequel timeline. And unless they're willing to fully recast, we're not going to get stories. I've said it 100 times too. There's no way they deep fake these characters for full movies. If they do that, it will be for cameos or action sequences or a 5-minute scene. It's not going to be as lead characters. So their routes are animation or their routes are recast if you want to see them in some type of visual medium. If not, it's going to be books. You know my thoughts, though, Critical Thinker. Like I've said, books are the best way to go. It's the reason we fell in love with them so much in the past because we're able to do anything with these characters in books and tell big, expansive, exciting stories without having to worry about the limits of what we can do with our budget, or worry about the time limits of a movie or a season long limit, right? We can tell as many stories as we want. It's why we fell in love with these books and these characters specifically in the EU in the 90s and early 2000s, and then, continuing up through the early 2010s. But if you're not going to do books, which I think is the least likely thing they do, because it doesn't make them as much money. Um, if you're not going to do books, then I would do recast. As much as I would enjoy an animated series, it just doesn't have the weight, especially the animated series that in the post Disney Plus era of Star Wars animation. They just haven't had the weight or been as strong as they were pre Disney Plus Star Wars. And I think animation is also just kind of another thing that they think of as a tier below. So if they're going to use these popular characters, if you get an animated show, it's not going to be as expansive. It'll be a show that's interesting. People might like it. It might be, the adventure of the week with Luke and Ben Solo, or the adventure of the week with Han and Leia, right? I could see them doing a Clone Wars esque show like that, where it's a bunch of different adventures with these characters, but I don't think it gets into the meat of their stories. I think they're saving the meat of their stories for live action because they would like to find a way to make it work, because that will make them the most money. And so that's why we're still not getting it. In some ways, I appreciate that because they haven't gone with bad storytelling just to make money yet with these characters. But I also am nervous about the future prospects. But uh, realistically, I think they are looking for a way to bring them to live action again, and it will most likely, if they are the main characters, it will not be deep fake. If they are not the main characters and all we get of them is a cameo, then it will be deep fake. So we'll see what they do here as they wrap up Mandalorian.
Yeah, I think you've asked this before, but like Liam said, we think we both love books. It's just the fact that these are characters that got their biggest development post original trilogy in books. Uh, a little uneven in the Bantam era, admittedly, but at least the big 3 had very solid development. New Jedi onward, Jedi Order onwards, and that really helped elevate some of those storylines that were pretty important to, like, their late 20s, early 30s, right? When they're in that big transition phase of becoming not just the upstarts, but the establishment of Star Wars, right? So, cool stuff there, all right? It's just how's that gonna happen in canon? I mean, again, we know in canon, like, Luke starts his academy earlier, and we do know this whatever this heir to the Empire, like, story is gonna happen at the same time, if not a little earlier. Things are moving a little faster timeline-wise, it's just, yeah, there aren't any stories, so books should happen. I think the High Republic Initiative, as wonderful as it was just a lot with old-time multimedia tied in, so I think there might focus on stuff being a little bit more, like, condensed, like, just, one phase worth of story, like, for 5 years and cover it with comics, books, whatever, and then be like, "That's just 5 years that we've covered for their life," right? And if we wanna touch up other stuff, we can, right? But here's an interesting story you can do here. I think that stuff has to be the priority if they do books. Like you're saying, books only seem to be the case if they're not committing to animation, not committing to live action. Sure, I agree, but we're also entering this, like, post Disney Plus world where they can't just put stuff up on there either, like, and it'll just work. So now it's either go big or go home, right? And you can't make a movie for the original trilogy characters with just pure deepfake, especially as public perception, especially in the arts around AI, continues to get worse and worse and worse. I just saw one AI ad, this Twitter AI ad where they're like, it's a proof of concept, or I don't know if it's a proof of concept or if they've actually really made it happen quite yet. But you're watching a movie or like Suits TV show, someone is like passing a can, and then you enter an ad break, and that can will then change with AI and have the actor like, tell you, and I saw this video, it was disgusting seeing Harvey from Suits try to sell me, like, some soda can brand, like, and then transition you back in. I know we've had the whole, Cerveza Cristal meme that happened in Star Wars, but that's, like, original footage shot, put together. Obviously, Lucasfilm didn't like it, right? But it was funny, it was a meme. This is, like, unironic, right? So we're not in that this day and age where we can just deep fake stuff just like we were when Mando season 2 came out and Book of Boba Fett when the mood was still more positive toward it. We continue to see more and more negative uses of it and more just alarmingly insensitive uses of it. So I think if they use deepfake, it's gotta be mostly as like a, just fix like a nose or something, like, still keep the actor, as a majority of the performance, right? They can't just be like a full face mask anymore. It's almost gotta be like a digital replacement for prosthetics. That's the only way I can really see elements of that being used, or like if there are certain shots where they just don't look anything at all like Mark Hamill or Carrie Fisher, or Harrison Ford. Yeah, but, at the same time, I'd love to see an Alden come back, right? Alden, let him age up, he's already older, right? Let him play a little bit more to that age of an older Han, get his hair right. If you have to use a deepfake, use it a little bit for, like, a couple of his features, right? But not the whole thing, right? And yes, I know you're saying Disney wants to normalize AI. I know on Disney Plus, they're having, like, a web content creation section where you can throw in stuff, and they're allowing people to do AI generated content. But that's not gonna go well, all right? It's not gonna be the big selling point, like, "Oh, I'm paying this much money to watch people make, like, AI generated videos about something that someone at Pixar is making, someone at former Fox Studios are making," stuff like that. No, it's not gonna be a big thing, and even those small things they're just not being well received. It's just a fact. It's just a fact. So I think we do get recast if they commit to, like, showing them up in, like, Heir to the Empire adaptation movie or whatever that New Republic finale movie with Filoni is, and then we get to see them show up in, like, some, small little shows and scenes, again, like, mostly cameo roles, but stuff like that. I'd love for it to be like that, so that way you can be like, "Okay, they're here at this time point in time, this is their role, this is what they do, but this is everything that was leading up to it." You can read it in these books, and you can see some interesting changes happen in between, and then some entirely different storylines that don't have to be dependent on something happening in animation or live action. That's the ideal, where you have them still used sparingly, but just in key moments without having to, like, commit necessarily to, like, big name actors or actors that just take over the role and make that their whole life for, like, the next 30, 40 years. But is that gonna happen? I don't know, man. I really don't know. I think we have to wait for streaming's collapse to settle, right? Now with Netflix acquiring Warner Brothers, now how does that change, like, an IP juggernaut like DC, which is already great at marketing? Plus now Netflix being the best marketing and merchandise of all the streaming services. How does that change their IP franchises and all that? How does that make Disney have to react? Be like, "Oh, we actually have to put more stuff in animation, maybe. Maybe we have to put more stuff in our merchandising." Stuff like that all kinda comes into play. We have to see how even, like, a Netflix is gonna react to taking these big IP actors and characters, bring them into TV shows, bring them back into live action. Is it gonna work the same way or not? I don't know. I think we just have to wait for a couple of these reactions to happen, and I think Disney's now gonna have to take another step back and be like, "Okay, we had a plan. Is it gonna be something we can adjust, or now that stream bubbles burst, or are we gonna have to see how Netflix might even reconfigure everything once again?"
They are going to be a little bit more open, I think, to doing OT stuff if Starfighter and Mandalorian bomb, because they'll go back to what's safe. I mean, we've seen that. That's the history of Hollywood. Hollywood, is a big money venture, so they want to take as conservative of a risk as possible when it comes to putting their money up on something, and they're trying to see if they can pave the way with new Star Wars IP in theaters. But if they bomb, we're going to go back to the well of OT characters or characters they've shown before on film, whether it be Rey or Kylo Ren or whatever. They want to do things that are safe. So this is our chance to get both if these movies succeed. Because I think if these movies succeed, we'll have way more risks being taken by Star Wars because they'll say, "Hey, we made two, new IPs." Even though Mandalorian's not a new IP, it's a new theatrical IP. We took two new IPs and put them in theaters, and they both made us money. Then we have a higher chance of getting more and more projects, but we have them a higher chance of them falling back to OT just by default if these two fail. So it's kind of, I think at some point it's still in the cards no matter what happens with the future of Star Wars theatrical, because it's just the lifeblood of Star Wars. And I think, outside of the actors being old, if those actors were in their 40s or 50s, that's all we would be seeing. It wouldn't have matter, what we saw from the sequels or prequels. That's all we would be seeing. um, and I think that's why there's a strong possibility we see more Hayden and Ewan as well, because they're just they're the closest things, even though they're getting older too. They're the closest things to the core of what Star Wars is that we have, the closest actors we have to the core of Star Wars. That I think you see them try to just prop up, more of those pieces over the coming years. But thanks for the question. We're going to have to get back to the next few books here because we are running out of time. We're almost at the hour and a half mark for tonight's stream, and we've been trying to keep it at that hour and a half mark. So let's go back to the books here. Let's talk about the fifth book released this year, and it was The Acolyte, The Crystal Crown. So, like we said earlier, nobody seemed to have read these Acolyte books, and especially nobody seems to have read The Crystal Crown. But we read it, and I just finished this one last week, and I did not like this book really at all. It's okay in parts. The beginning was all right. I didn't know anything about this book going in, and I was definitely disappointed when about 7, 8 chapters in, we go from, being obviously a Jackie Yord book to, wow, this is just going to be Hunger Games light in Star Wars. And that's ultimately what it kind of turns into. It devolves into other things as it adds more subplots and just kind of fumbles for true purpose. But a lot of the stuff around the Hunger Games scenario doesn't make that much sense for the Star Wars characters. It tries to explain it away with some plot points that just ultimately don't really go anywhere, don't really, make there be a reason why Jackie and Yord specifically are a part of this story. And then the last thing too is it's kind of the same disappointment I had with Wayseeker. When you have prequel books or tie-in books to a TV show, you want to get more out of these characters. You want to get more out of these stories. And while I felt like with Wayseeker I got more out of Vernestra, but it was a Vernestra that didn't really have anything to do with the Acolyte. This story, I didn't really feel like I got anything out of Jecki or Yord. They're pretty stagnant. They're pretty similar to who they are in the show. They start similarly, they end similarly. It's like the only thing you really get out of them is that they learn to like each other a little more. And that's kind of it. And I thought it was about as bare bones of an approach to fleshing characters out from other material, especially characters who aren't leads in that material. Like Jecki and Yord, they have a good amount of screen time, but they're not the leads of the Acolyte. So there's a lot to learn about them. And I just didn't feel like this book took the approach of, well, let's help you learn and enjoy these characters a little more. When you're doing a tie-in book, you can take two different approaches. You can either take the approach of everybody already likes this character, so we're going to tell a new story with them, or you can take the approach of this is a small character that people don't know anything about. Let's explain why people should love them more than they did originally. And this one takes the first approach with characters that we don't personally, I didn't really like that much already. So while I found Jecki a cool piece of the Acolyte and the action scenes with Jecki and Yord exceptional in the Acolyte, there wasn't much from a character perspective I was attached to with them to just be like, hey, yeah, I want to jump into a new adventure with Jecki and Yord. I was hoping to just get a little bit more out of this book why I should like them as people. And I don't really get that. They're pretty simple, basic Jedi characters. And so I was disappointed with Crystal Crown. I have it as my last place, my 8 out of 8. Maybe it's a little biased from just having just read it. Maybe Wayseeker would be worse. They're both kind of right there for the worst book of the year for me. But I was also disappointed with this one. I was more so disappointed with Wayseeker because I had a existing attachment to Vernestra that I wanted clarity on with her connection to the Acolyte, whereas this one I didn't really have any connection to the characters. But I also felt like this had a lot easier path to making me enjoy these characters a little bit more and being a little bit more sad when they go in the show. And ultimately, I just thought it was super forgettable and basic.
It's in last place for me as well. I mean, I haven't fully finished reading this, but I'm finding this just to be okay. I'm enjoying all the Jackie stuff. I will say that I like that character even during her limited appearance in the show, but just some of her headspace about Soul, about his past and stuff like that. Stuff like that makes me go like, "Ah, man, we missed out on her and Osha really having a great dynamic and seeing, like, a little bit more of a former apprentice, a first to senior versus current, the one who's actually living up to the pressures and stuff like that," right? Like, ah, man, all of that stuff I thought was there, but, like, this book just, like, throws one little bite to you and then, like, goes its own way. Which would be fine in, like, a couple for, like, a supporting character in a young adult High Republic book, but these are the leads of what should be a totally fully open reign book. Yord is just the same, right? There's just very little about it. The dynamic plays out exactly the same way. Like you said, it is very Hunger Games-esque. The mystery of it, it's like, "Okay, sure," like, whatever. So, yeah, once it kinda gets into that, it actually just gets worse for me, which is a bummer, so not much else to say. I wish these 2 were stronger tie-ins and at least got to be something unique, but they don't really get to be, so this was my 8th place.
And yeah, for Critical Thinker, he says, so like a lot of canon character books, yes and no, because yes, in that it takes the approach of let's do an adventure with characters you already know. But usually with canon character books, we're taking characters like Obi-Wan or Anakin or Darth Vader recently, or the Bad Batch, who we're going to talk about next. Characters you already like or know a lot about. This one takes two characters who are only in a couple, like 4 episodes of the show, the Acolyte show, don't have that much screen time, and are like, we're also going to tell you almost nothing new about them. Uh, that's, I think, the most disappointing thing about this. It treats it as if you already have loved these characters for a long time, and maybe that was the hope for people when they were watching the Acolyte, that they would fall in love with them and then want to read this book because they love them. But for me, as somebody who didn't like the Acolyte, that was not the case. Let's talk about the next one, though, which was Sanctuary, a Bad Batch novel. And this had all the makings of something that could have gone horribly wrong. It takes place between 2 episodes of the end of season 2, not even the finale of season 2, between the kind of settling of the Bad Batch on Pabu and before the finale of season 2 of the Bad Batch. And the limited scope of this is felt. Like, you can feel the fact that it can't do too much, because if you've seen the Bad Batch, you know what ends up happening in Tech shortly after this. But it uses some of that forewarning to actually make a very compelling story. And I was surprised with this one. Maybe it was because I had absolutely zero expectations for this. I was not excited for it just because of the placement. I would have been excited for a Bad Batch book, but not where it was placed. Fee was going to be a big character, and Fee was never a character I loved. I didn't dislike Fee, but I didn't need a book about her. And this really exceeded everything I expected from it. It was a book that was quick, fast paced, compelling, pretty dark at times. It does elevate the Bad Batch to that adult level. Has some really great stuff for Tech, some great stuff for Hunter. The villains were significantly more interesting than we usually get from these kind of one off Star Wars canon books. And so I thought what Lamar Giles does here with Bad Batch Sanctuary is take a concept that in canon we've seen 100 times and has oftentimes felt middle of the road or underwhelming, and at least elevate it to something that was memorable and worth reading. Is this one of the great Star Wars books ever? No. But I found myself enjoying Bad Batch Sanctuary, and kind of in this retrospective on 2025 Star Wars books, I think it's easily the most surprising book of the year. And it is in that upper echelon to me of 2025 Star Wars books. I had a tough time picking between this and my fourth place, but I ended up putting the Bad Batch Sanctuary at third. I think it's a solid book, well rounded, one that exceeded expectations, and maybe that's why it's a little higher for me than some of the other books that are on the list, but one that I think we will be talking about in a few years as one of the more underrated books in canon.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Bad Batch Sanctuary. Like Critical Thinker saying, yes, we are quite positive on it because we didn't know what to expect. We didn't expect anything. And it was between two episodes of a show where it's like, oh, Pabu's a shred. Oh, they've finished help rebuilding Pabu. Okay, great. What are you gonna really do out of that? But like it's a really great introspective story too about like how the batch has suffered and changed as a family unit, as a military unit. What's the growth for characters like Omega and all that? Why she's so important to her? And yeah, I really liked all that stuff. Fee got a huge role, like her and her brown eyes. I love that dynamic in that book. Omega, again, you get to see more stuff that's like, "Oh, wow, like, this is why they care for." She is special in her own way. We don't know exactly what it is still yet, right? But they care about her deeply, and she constantly shows up. I did like a lot of the very early Imperial stuff too. I found that quite surprising. Like, that character, I forget her name, but the proprietor lady, she's twisted. Like, I don't think you're like, I'm trying to look for some darker elements. There are some darker elements with her. She does some really messed up things, and she's like, "Yeah, I'm friends with Palpatine, and I'll be fine." And I don't know if she ultimately is or isn't. I'm not gonna give that away, but it's weird. It's absolutely weird, and yeah, there's a nice fulfilling chapter for her at the end of the book for sure, but yeah, she brings in a lot of the darkness quite a bit, and everything with, like, the clones and how they stand apart from other clones, how they're together, how the CIS kinda comes into play. Another book that had some very interesting angles with the CIS. Yeah, I again, something that Bad Batch itself as a show had done a little bit more of, but I found this to be a very strong storyline that could have been its own story arc in the show. So, pretty good, honestly. I think this is at least a good 2-episode arc for the show, if not even 3 with the depth that's there. So, yeah, I would say I would give this, for me, my number 4.
Let's get to the last two right now because we are running out of time. And then if we have any time, we'll take your guys' last few questions before logging off. Again, Super Chat guarantees your question on the stream tonight. And then you can also, if you are a Patreon or YouTube membership program member of a certain tier, get priority chat access every stream. So make sure you check those out as well. But we are running short on time. So let's talk about the second to last Star Wars book of the year, The Last Order, which was a book that was billed as a Finn and Janna book taking place post the rise of Skywalker. Now, if you've seen our review or some of the discourse around this book, that specific log line is the main thing that disappointed most people with this story, is the fact that this story almost in no way takes place post the rise of Skywalker. It is 90% flashbacks to things that happened before The Force Awakens. Those flashbacks are told in a pretty compelling fashion, especially Janna's. It makes you a lot more interested in her story and the way she was as a leader, the way she was as a First Order stormtrooper. I think the book does give some nice insights into the hierarchy and structure of the First Order military. It is a book that pretty technically written, so that can sometimes come across as boring. That can sometimes come across as difficult to follow, especially when all the characters are numbers, not names, because it goes through the perspective of First Order stormtroopers. But there is a lot of cool stuff to read in this book. I think overall it just remains a disappointing story considering they were billing it as the first story post Rise of Skywalker in honor of the 10-year anniversary of The Force Awakens and the sequel trilogy. We were going to get our first post Rise of Skywalker story, and then only about 10% of it takes place post Rise of Skywalker, and it's all about as simple and predictable as you would expect of a book that really does not want to tell anything post Rise of Skywalker. So there's a lot of disappointing aspects of The Last Order. There are quite a few compelling aspects. I think it's a book that, depending on what side of the fence you're on, with like you don't really care about it being post Rise of the Skywalker, or you're really excited for it to be post Rise of Skywalker, that will partially make or break your enthusiasm about it when you're done reading it. For me, I was really excited for something post Rise of Skywalker. I was excited to see something that really stood alone for Finn. And I think that was the other thing that was kind of disappointing to me when I finished the book was the Finn stuff is fine, it's good, but again, it's limited because Finn as a character, we know where he ends up, and we ultimately know that his flashback is not fully going to change him until we get to the Force Awakens. So it's the Janna stuff, and so that kind of makes it almost, one third of the book, a little over a third of the book that's really compelling, and the rest I just thought was okay. So for me, this was a disappointing read, not an awful read, not really even a bad read. I still think it's significantly better than the Acolyte books, but I put it as my sixth place out of the eight.
Yeah, I mean, again, like you said, just very misleading marketing. It really does pull down the book for a lot of people, but stick with it. And I think it is actually quite a compelling read, right? It gets knocked down because of the marketing for me. But because if this was just a book about like the origins of these two characters, I think it'd be quite good. And I would have loved to have seen some sort of storyline interweave them a little bit more directly, even if they're not directly crossing paths, like almost like the force bringing them and brushing them against each other. But, I really liked it. I'm also really thankful that it, like, leads so well in story before the awakening, like, there's so much there's like, "How is this gonna work?" And then where it ends with him, you're like, "Oh, yeah." They would not only give him this kinda little elevation to a squad leader, but also have him have this, like, subconscious thoughts, maybe stuff that would be, like, flash trained out of him, only to be forgotten as a soldier that committed down to the First Order, right? And what its ideals are, even if the First Order never truly is an idealistic organization. But yeah, I really liked it. I thought his companion, who was his bully slash friend, I thought he would have always been like the character that he holds in his hands with the bloody hand mark that he leaves him with, but it's not, right? So that I think that's one thing that if it could have been kept around would have been really interesting to see. It just doesn't happen here. But yeah, I mean, otherwise, pretty good story from him. I liked a lot of the stuff about propaganda, how they're kind of used as propaganda units and how it's all throughout the galaxy. But Janice is definitely the stronger story. She's so much more compelling because she's already in a position of power. She's already kind of wavering in her beliefs with the First Order, and then you get to see some of these wild cards about the First Order. I love the Empire, don't get me wrong, but the First Order has the ability to just have these random characters with cool armor, cool outfits show up and just break military command at will, and you're like, "Is this something that makes sense?" And based on historical examples, yeah, the more radical you are, the more crazy you are, and the more extreme fascist you are, the more you have these players that can upend stuff, even if they're not qualified and all that, and I found the characters that she interacted with oftentimes put her in positions where she's like, "This isn't even regulation that for me to, like, even have questions about, like, this is all just too crazy to handle." And she's constantly rising up to the challenge, but more and more stressed about her squad, and everything on Ansett Island, I think, comes to a great head. I think her story is just alone worth reading this. But for me too, it doesn't crack in my upper echelon. Those books are definitely stories that deliver. This one, again, with the marketing is just weird, but stick with it. I think it's quite good still. It's a 6 out of 8 for me for this year's rankings.
Well, then now our last book to talk about is Master of Evil, the most recent Star Wars book that has come out, and one of the more hyped books of the last few years that wasn't in the High Republic. And Master of Evil delivers on a lot of the things it sets out for. It's a compelling story. It's Adam Christopher, so it's extremely well written, exciting, very dark in places as well. And it has interesting new characters. That's something he didn't necessarily go after as much in Shadow of the Sith. It's very focused on Luke and Lando, obviously there, and then Rey's parents. This book, the main character is really this former Imperial Guard named Goff. And Goff is one of the more interesting Imperials we've had in a long time in a Star Wars book. And I think Adam Christopher writes him in a very compelling way. He's a character that's kind of caught between two worlds. You have the fading Republic into this empire, and you're seeing people who truly believe in their government, truly believe in what the former republic's right and wrongs were, so much so that they are just captivated by this new empire, but yet a lot of the things about them, their morals, their politics, all of that is caught in the past, and they don't realize it until it's too late. And a lot of the things with Goth in this story, I think are a great allegory for what happens ultimately throughout most of the bridge between Republic to Empire. And it can create even more compelling storytelling, moving forward into other takes in these first 5 years or so post Revenge of the Sith into the Dark Times. I think it's also especially interesting when you couple it with something like Mask of Fear from earlier this year. Like, there's a lot of really good, interesting perspective on both Rebel and Imperial side that we got this year around the beginning of the Dark Times, the transition from Revenge of the Sith. Unfortunately, this also was not a Darth Vader book. It really was sold as a Darth Vader book. And while the Vader moments are excellent, you can't help but feel like a lot of them are familiar, a lot of them having shades of the Vader Immortal game that we got from the VR studio, a lot of them having shades of Darth Vader Dark Lord of the Sith from Charles Soule. And this book is specifically set in the middle of that comic arc. So there's also kind of a box on what you can do with Vader here. And there's a lot of times where it feels like you're getting somewhere, but it's ultimately stuck in the fact that Vader is so well formed as a character at this time in canon that it's hard to really bring a new perspective. And so while there are great Vader chapters, great Vader moments, for somebody like myself who's read all this stuff and who's, really entrenched in the lore, I didn't find this an exceptional Vader story. I know a lot of people, we've gotten pushback in some of our comments in the review about, people who love this story. And I think that's great. That's awesome. And I think a lot of those perspectives probably are coming from people who didn't read the comics or haven't played Vader Immortal or haven't, read Dark Lord, The Rise of Darth Vader. There's just so many Vader stories around this timeline that Master of Evil can't help but feel familiar a lot of the times. I think ultimately the grand, larger MacGuffin is very fascinating. It kind of comes to a head pretty quickly at the end. So, not a great last act and not a great Vader story, but all the other characters are extremely strong. I think the plotting overall is really good, and the pacing up into the finale is very strong. So this is a weird one to wrestle with. I'm interested to see, what my thoughts are over the next year or so as I continue to settle with this story. But overall, I still liked this book quite a bit. It just wasn't the like 4 out of 5, 5 out of 5 I was hoping it to be. So I still kept it as my fourth favorite of the year. Like I said in the last section, it's pretty close to Bad Batch Sanctuary, arguably a better book than Bad Batch Sanctuary, but I had a lot more surprising reaction to the positive aspects of Bad Batch Sanctuary, where I didn't have any expectations for it, than Master of Evil, which I was a little disappointed by. So it is my fourth place out of eight.
Yeah, a lot of same similar thoughts. Again, this and Last Order being back-to-back books, being a bit misleading about their marketing, especially this one being Master of Evil, a very iconic line in the original Star Wars. You're like, wow, this should have him really the master of it, and he's not, right? But it is a shame that like we don't really get to see him dominate every chapter. We don't really get a lot of POV from him. But the chapters that we do get with Adam Christopher, he shows that he is a master, and he is definitely the canon master of dark side and dark side storytelling. He's just really good at it. Everything with the MacGuffin, even if it is a little rushed, I was like, "Wow, that's really interesting stuff here." Everything with the Force, you let this man touch, and I think he does a great job, especially if he has to play the darker, more nittier, grittier stuff. It's really more about, like, what Vader leaves behind, what Vader does than others witness, right? And he appropriately has some terrifying unleashing of power. Like, we read so much of the books, comics, and the movies, and we kinda underestimate just how insane some of the stuff that this guy is doing without, like, any expression on his face because it is a mask, right? So, I at least appreciate that perspective. That's something that I don't think canon has played too heavily into, but now we get to see it play like, "Oh, yeah, no, not only is he just evil with this crazy machine of a suit on, but, like, why exactly is he in this position?" And, Compnor being involved in this story too, I thought was really cool. Kind of fades a bit at the end there, which I found really strange. I think that should have been something tied in a little bit more. Like I've said throughout all this 2025 reviews, I love how the CIS and, like, the remnants and, like, the next steps past them play into the stories of the early empire. Like, you get to see Techno Union have a huge role in the story, and it's a really good role. I really did appreciate it, and how I liked how they tied in the MacGuffin here. But yeah, this is definitely led by the Royal Guard leader in Goth and his droid nines. Yeah, getting that whole perspective, getting what it's like to see that transition from episode 3 to 4 from that loyalist perspective and seeing how Vader is not just something that the Empire is going to ever totally be comfortable with. Like, whereas the First Order can thrive with characters that can break the chain of command or just weirdos that are like, I want to have custom armor. Vader is an anomaly, right? Vader, for everybody else, where you can ignore everything about Palpatine and be like, but here's an image of him that looks right. Nobody's comfortable with Palpatine, and God at least gives us a huge perspective on why exactly. And the fact that he's got a ticking clock in the story really pushes him to be as close as possible to Vader and work between Compton, work between Palpatine, work between Vader, have some begrudging respect for all of them, a loss of faith in all of them, and then kind of double down on who he is and what he wants to be and the ideals that he believes. And I think he is, uh, probably the best original character that we've seen come out of Adam Christopher's writings. He's done some great stuff in Shadow, but I think he is kind of playing off of characters that have already been introduced in Aftermath, and his original characters don't necessarily have huge plot relevance, but Goth is our POV. Goth the Nines, just great. So, for me, I do edge this over Sanctuary. I like Sanctuary quite a bit, but I just like how this one feels like a nice, fun arc of the 2017 comics under Charles Soule. This works for me, so big fan.
All right, well, we're going to answer a couple more questions here to round out the stream, but we do have to get going. We're a lot longer than our streams have been running recently. Let's scroll back up to the top. We had Permafrost, who asked, "What's the worst Christmas present you've ever gotten?" One year, my dad got me a pair of bongos. I don't know. I can't really think of one, honestly. Like, I appreciate whatever anybody gets me for Christmas. I have a hard time ever thinking about anything as a bad gift, and I know that probably sounds simple, but I don't know. I'm usually pretty happy with everything I get. I also usually outline what I want for Christmas to people, so I usually get the things that I've asked for. So personally, I can't really answer that. I can't think of anything that I have gotten that I didn't like.
I have never really gotten a bad present from my parents or anything like that. I mean, we're not like big Christmas enjoyers, right? We like holiday season, we get gifts for each other, but it's not like a huge day for us. But I will say in college, I specifically asked for the Last Jedi poster of in red with everybody like with the little skiffs running across crate and all that, and I got a really bad Tops poster, and I just don't like the Tops posters. It just feels like a bunch of action figurines put together, and I just felt really bad at one point. But then I was like, no, I sent a direct link for this to my Secret Santa. They they should have just clicked it. I got them the cheapest link, right? And they paid more. I found out for something that I had to be like, "Oh, cool." But it was one of the most ugliest Last Jedi posters I've seen, and I do not have it anymore. So that should tell you how much I value that, and I keep a lot of my posters even regardless of condition. You just don't see it here because I only got 1 here, but yeah, that was not my favorite.
And then I think the last thing we'll have a chance to answer is Sith Slayer 1977, who says, "Have you guys read the original trilogy novelizations, and what did you think? How would you rate them?" They're tough to rank because one of the cool things about them is the fact that they are based on shooting scripts for those movies, and George Lucas is a notorious, like, absolutely hack it up in the editing room and let's change it while we're editing. He's said that so many times. Like, there you can find interviews with him from the 80s while he's editing Empire. And he's like, every filmmaker has their secret weapon, mine's editing. And he's said that he's never happy with his scripts, he's never happy with shooting, but where he ends up falling in love with his projects is in the editing room. So that being said, they're all interesting because they all are focused on a part of Star Wars that ultimately is very different from what you finally see. That being said, I think my favorite, just purely from the historical perspective, is going back to Star Wars from the Adventures of Luke Skywalker, which is the original novelization. It's just a fun read. It's so different. It's completely different. So much different lore. I do have in my history of Star Wars franchise videos that I made full like breakdown of what all the differences are. If you want to check that out, I think I turned them into shorts too. But it's super different. Obviously, not as compelling of a story as The Empire Strikes Back. Maybe even the weakest written book of the three, but it's the one that's the most different. So if you're interested in seeing, some of the early ideas for Star Wars that were ultimately changed, I think that's the one that's the most worth checking out. After that, I would say the best one is The Empire Strikes Back because it's the best story. But the Return of the Jedi is a solid one as well. They're all good. I mean, because at the heart of them, they are the Star Wars original trilogy. So you will be, if you love those movies, which I assume you do, you will enjoy all of them. And I think you'll enjoy all the different aspects of each one and how they have a little bit different approach to the stories themselves. But I think the original is the one that's the most intriguing because it's like some of this is a what could have been or what was an alternate take on the story. And that one is credited to George Lucas. He didn't actually write it. Alan Dean Foster wrote it, who wrote Splinter of the Mind's Eye, and then later wrote The Force Awakens novelization. I believe The Approaching Storm as well. So it's also kind of an interesting one because I'm not 100% sure how much focus had on it, but his name is on it. So I assume he was a little bit more involved with the novelization than maybe he was for Empire and Return of the Jedi.
I'm gonna keep this short. I've never read any of them. That's definitely a massive hole for me when it comes to Star Wars and novelizations, and I hope to read them one day.
Well, I think that's going to wrap up our stream tonight, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Longer stream, but we hope you enjoyed the discussion about the Star Wars books. If you enjoy Star Wars book content, we review every single Star Wars book, and we also will be doing our end of the year rankings of the canon books. We'll have our tier list, and we are considering doing a joint top 10 Star Wars canon books for the channel, an official like Star Wars Lads one. So if you guys would like to see either video, make sure you subscribe. Let us know in the comments if you'd like to see those on the channel. Finally finished reading every single canon book this year, so there will be a complete list. Make sure you like the video. If you haven't, comment below your thoughts. If you're watching on replay, make sure you join us every week, Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Pacific time. We go live. Next week, we'll be talking about all the upcoming releases of 2026 from the film and TV side of Star Wars. And then the week after, we'll talk about the media and books side. So make sure you come and join us for these next few weeks. Hopefully, you're all having a great holiday season and a good wrap up to your year. Thank you so much for watching our stream tonight, everybody. And we will see you all next.